Imagine dying, not in battle, not from disease, but by your own hand, hanging from a tree for 9 days with a spear driven through your side, staring into an abyss, waiting for secrets to crawl out of the darkness. And you did it to yourself, on purpose, because you were afraid of what was coming. That is Odin. That is the Allfather, and he is nothing like you've been told. Sometime around 793 CE, a longship beached at the monastery of Lindisfarne off the northeast coast of England. What happened next terrified a continent. Warriors who laughed at death, warriors with ravens painted on their shields and names of gods carved into their spear hafts. The medieval world called them pagans, demons, monsters. But here is what those monks on Lindisfarne never understood. The men tearing through their walls weren't worshipping gods of conquest and mindless violence. They were living inside a mythology so complex, so psychologically rich, so saturated with grief and inevitability that it would take scholars over 1,000 years to fully begin to unpack it. These weren't simple stories around a fire. This was a complete cosmology, a framework for everything: life, death, loss, time itself. And almost no one today actually knows what it says. Start at the beginning, not earth, not heaven. Start at the tree. Yggdrasil, an ash tree so immense it holds 9 separate worlds in its branches and roots. Asgard, home of the gods perched at the crown. Midgard, Middle-earth, our world, cradled in the middle. Below that, Niflheim, a realm of ice and mist where the dishonored dead drifted without purpose. Jotunheim, home of the giants. Svartalfheim, where dark elves and dwarves shaped weapons of terrible power. 9 realms in total, all connected. All dependent on this single living tree, whose roots were constantly being gnawed by a serpent named Nidhugr. The tree was dying, slowly, always. To the Vikings, this wasn't horror. This was just the shape of the world. Everything living, everything decaying, everything connected, and the center of it all perpetually under attack. That cosmology wasn't decoration, it was instruction. Now meet the god at the top of it, Odin, the Allfather. One-eyed, gray-cloaked, wandering. In the 13th century Icelandic text known as the Prose Edda, our single richest source for Norse myth, compiled by the scholar Snorri Sturluson, Odin is described as the king of the Aesir gods, the one who breathed life into the first humans. He should be majestic, noble, serene. He is none of those things. Odin tore out his own eye and dropped it into the well of Mimir just to drink 1 sip of cosmic wisdom. He impaled himself on the world tree for 9 days and 9 nights, fasting, delirious, until the runes, the universe's secret language, finally revealed themselves. He sent 2 ravens, Hugin and Munin, thought and memory, out across the 9 realms every single morning and confessed openly that he feared more for Munin than Hugin. He was more afraid of losing his memory than his mind. This is not a god of power. This is a god of desperate, obsessive preparation. Because Odin had seen the future, and the future was Ragnarok. The apocalypse, the death of the gods, his own death, swallowed alive by the wolf Fenrir. And no matter how much knowledge he gathered, no matter how many warriors he recruited for his hall in Valhalla, he could not stop it. He could only delay it. He was a king building a fortress against a flood he already knew would win. The Vikings worshipped him anyway, because they understood him completely. While Odin was for the elite, kings, skalds, warriors who courted death and called it honor, Thor belonged to everyone else. Forget the blonde demigod with the perfect jawline. The Thor of actual Norse myth was red-bearded, thick-necked, and perpetually furious. Not subtle, not calculating. He ate entire oxen at a sitting. He drank so deeply from a drinking horn connected to the ocean that he lowered the tide. When he crossed the sky in his goat-drawn chariot, the thunder was his wheels on the clouds. And the farmers of Scandinavia loved him for it, because Thor was the one who fought the giants. Not for Odin's glory, not for the gods' politics, for humanity. Every storm he brought was a battle against chaos. Every harvest that survived the winter was, in some way, Thor's work. Ordinary people wore tiny hammer amulets, Mjolnir pendants, around their necks the way others wore crosses. Archaeologists have found thousands of them across the Norse world, from Iceland to the Baltic coast. When Christianity began pressing into Scandinavia in the 9th and 10th centuries, some craftsmen made molds that could cast both a cross and a hammer from the same template, covering their bets. But they knew who they trusted most when the storm came. And then there is Loki. Hollywood made him a villain. The myths made him something far more interesting and far more tragic. In the early stories, Loki is not evil. He is chaos in a world that desperately needs order, and he knows it. He helps the gods build Asgard's walls. He recovers Thor's stolen hammer. He solves crisis after crisis with a shape-shifting cleverness no other god possesses. At one point, he gives birth, and not metaphorically, he becomes a mare, mates with a stallion, and delivers Sleipnir, Odin's eight-legged horse. The gods used him, constantly, called on his cunning when they needed it, and recoiled from him when they didn't. He was half giant by birth, always the outsider, always good enough to be useful, but never quite good enough to belong. Then came the death of Balder. Balder, the most beloved of all the gods, radiant, kind, universally adored, was killed by a mistletoe dart that Loki had guided. The gods took Loki and bound him in a cave with a serpent dripping venom onto his face, and there he waited, screaming, for centuries. The earthquakes, the old Norsemen said, were Loki thrashing in his chains. When Ragnarok finally comes, Loki breaks free and leads the giants against the gods. Modern readers call this his villainy. But read the myth again. What exactly did they expect would happen? You can only hold a broken, brilliant, marginalized creature in agony for so long before it stops caring what it destroys on the way out. Which brings us to Ragnarok, the end of all things. Fenrir the wolf swallows Odin. Thor kills the world serpent Jormungandr and walks exactly 9 steps before dying from its venom. The sun goes dark, the sea swallows the land, Yggdrasil shudders, every major god dies, almost without exception. And here is the thing that should stop you cold. The Vikings knew this was coming, and they didn't despair. They didn't try to prevent it. They prepared for it, yes, but they also accepted it. Because in Norse cosmology, after Ragnarok, the earth rises again from the sea, new and green. The surviving gods return. 2 humans emerge from the forest. Life begins again. Ragnarok is not a punishment, it is a season. The worst winter the universe will ever survive, but a winter nonetheless. This is what those warriors at Lindisfarne actually believed when they gripped their axes and went screaming into the impossible. The world ends, and then it doesn't. What matters is how you behave before it does. These stories almost disappeared entirely. By 1100 CE, Christianity had largely absorbed Scandinavia. The old myths went underground, the oral traditions frayed, and then in 13th century Iceland, a Christian politician and scholar named Snorri Sturluson sat down and wrote them out. Not because he believed them, but because he wanted to preserve the poetic tradition they had inspired. Without him, we likely lose Odin's sacrifice, Thor's real face, Loki's tragedy. Most of what we know comes from one Christian man who disagreed with everything he was preserving. The myths survived against all probability, and they came back roaring. Wagner built operas around them. Tolkien borrowed their bones. Marvel turned them into blockbusters. And millions of people who couldn't name a single line from Snorri Sturluson are wearing Mjolnir pendants today without knowing why they feel so right. The Norse gods survived their own apocalypse, just like they always said they would. So here is what to sit with. A culture that believed the universe was dying, that the gods themselves were doomed, built some of the most vital, expansive, courageous civilizations the medieval world ever produced. They didn't flinch at fate. They sailed straight into it. What does it tell us about ourselves that we keep coming back to these stories? That a one-eyed god